wiki stuff is volunteer activity for me, so that it fits that it's a holiday today. Yeah, I'm open to be interrupted anyway. Happy to dig deeper into any of that. I'm also easily findable through search engines, and you will find out about my interests basically while I'm talking. So now let me retry the screen sharing thing again. Here we go.
We are also recording now, so.
Yeah, that's fine with me. Okay.
Yes, you can hide the line there. Just click on hide and it will hide this. Awesome.
Okay. So yeah, I'll now switch to the, where is it? The Etherpad, to see whether any of you have done anything in there. No, I see there's like 5 unnamed people in here. The names, since I don't know your names are not so important for me, but they might be useful for you yourself as a group. And yeah, just feel free to type in here your names, and also here in the main body of the thing. I'll start by just going to a place on Wikidata where people who are interested in medicine interact. So as you probably know from what Shani has told you so far, there are multiple groups of people interacting through Wikipedia, Wikidata, and the related websites. And once there is a group of such people interacting in a systematic fashion, they often call this Wiki project. And
can you make it larger?
Yes.
Tiny on our screen still, a bit more.
Sorry, I have a laptop. Yeah, this. But the good thing is, all the links are in the Etherpad, so you can open them on your own machine and follow that way. I have no idea how large or small this is on your screen right now when you're.
Can you do Control+?
Yeah, well, I did that, and this basically you see what I see. Right now, I can't. I just see a few lines.
Much better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that will be a very small screen for me. But yeah, it kind of models the mobile experience for many. So and everything's moving towards mobile, including Wikidata, which has its own challenges. So when a number of people come together, they form a wiki project, which has a page on that corresponding wiki. In this case, this is Wikidata. It usually sits in a different namespace. That shouldn't concern you too much. Important thing is on that for that wiki project then outlines a number of things that people want to do. So for instance, Wiki Project Medicine here on Wikidata wants to manage the site links for medical topics. That means the links between different language versions of Wikipedia, or the links between Wikimedia Commons and Wikipedia, or Wikisource and the other related Wikimedia projects. They're all mediated via Wikidata, and for the subset of those topics that are medical, Wiki Project Medicine is taking care of that. Then one important aspect of Wikidata is the usage of identifiers. So for instance, the Ebola virus disease has the identity 4325 in the disease ontology database. Not sure whether you've talked about ontologies. It's basically a system of controlled vocabularies that are linked to each other in a systematic fashion. And so, yeah, if you are using this disease ontology and then you're using the ID 4325, then everybody who also uses that knows that we're talking about the Ebola fever, basically. And Wikidata stores thousands of such identifiers for medicine and many other topics, art, sports, whatever. And they all have to be worked on in a consistent fashion, for which there are other wiki projects, for instance, Wiki Project Ontology and Wiki Project names and things like that. we want to, for things that are of interest to medicine researchers and physicians and others in this space, we want to build an ontology of our own if external ones are not existing or cannot be used. This means that, for instance, every disease has to be classified as being a disease or being a disease of a certain kind, for which we use a particular Wikidata property, P279, which means subclass of. And the same then goes for like genes or proteins. This is a protein that is a subclass of that other kind of protein, and so on. And then we add simple statements. So if we go, for instance, to the item about the Ebola virus disease, here in English we have viral infectious disease found in humans and other animals. You have other languages. I don't normally edit in Hebrew, so I don't have that, but I guess you can find it. Yeah, right now actually the display is a bit messed up because I've enlarged it too much. Anyway, so we're also translating between languages the Wikidata way, which means we translate things once and not many times as you do in normal translations. So once we know that, for instance, Ebola fever is called Ebola virus disease in English, then we don't need to repeat that translation process. And Wikidata Medicine oversees those translations. And then that is all about kind of getting the data in. For that, we need properties. We will look at those. And finally, we also want to get data out, and that's why there are queries. You have already done some simple queries, Shani told me. We will do a few more. And we will also look at how those queries can be used in actually learning stuff or curating information on Wikidata. Yeah, I'll just go on unless you interrupt me. And so in terms of the properties, there is actually a long list of properties that are relevant to medicine. I'll just briefly scroll over them so that you get an idea. And then I'll just randomly pick some to take a closer look here. So we had general medicine, we had anatomy, nerves and brain, pharmacology, and so on. Yeah, and then identifiers for identifiers. And many others. And so here is one template that kind of brings together most of them, which groups them in three rough categories. One is basic. So if we're talking about a disease, it usually has symptoms, has a cause. There are certain medical examinations and treatments that are appropriate for this kind of condition, and so on. There might be an anatomical location, there might be a side effect of a certain treatment, and so on. These are basic medical, let's say, properties. Some of them are optional because they don't apply to everything. So, for instance, the chemical formula, well, obviously only applies to chemical compounds and things like that. Or things found in taxon only applies to substances that are actually found in nature. And then we have database identifiers. Yeah, there are lots of medical databases, and Wikidata links to many of them, and some of them have actually started to link back. So that's the very brief overview. Now I've actually lost the Etherpad. Let me check whether I have it somewhere else. No, so I'll have to go back. Oh, that's a bit annoying. Oh, here you go. Yeah, so data models, that's something I wanted to show. And I'll close a few of the other tabs because it's getting a bit crowded here on my screen. And I'll enlarge that as well so that you can follow where I am. So I'm in line number 6 now. Data models. One of the things that we're concerned about here is, well, how do we actually model things that are of relevance to medicine? So for instance, clinical trials. So we go to this clinical trials page, and there we see that we have a very basic, well, data model. So I assume that by now you all know roughly what a clinical trial is and that there are different kinds of them and things like that. So, but for the purpose of this, well, half an hour or so, it's good enough to know that they should have some sort of identifier in some database. They should have a title. They should have a start time, an end time. Some funder should be identified and things like that. And of course, there should be some medical condition that is the target of the trial. And yeah, it should be clear whether it's a phase 1, 2, or 3 or so trial. And there's it should be stated where this trial actually takes place. So these are some basic pieces of information that are useful to know about clinical trials. There are many more, but these ones have already been mapped to Wikidata, so you can now express them in terms of Wikidata properties. Here you see some earlier attempts to do the same thing. I'll just scroll over that. And the most recent, let's say, kind of presentation of this information is here in a tool called Scholia, which we will come back to occasionally during this talk. And here you basically see a list of recent clinical trials that Wikidata knows of, which is only a very small subset of all those clinical trials because we've just started to index clinical trials. And this list comes to you not by some human curating them, but by basically just having a pre-formatted Wikidata query. So here you see the query. It looks not very complex, so just 16 lines, including some white space. I'll not go into detail. The big thing for you to know is that you can hide the complexity of such queries to just get such lists. But if you want to see it, you can always click on this edit on Wikidata button, and then yeah, you can see the real query. There are different phases of clinical trials, and here you see how many of those Wikidata knows about at the moment, plotted over time. You can see which medical conditions are being targeted by those clinical trials. And again, you can click on the query itself, but also you can click on any of those medical conditions. So for instance, you can click on the lung neoplasm, and then, well, here you don't see much. So let's see whether we have something else here. Yeah, also not too much. You see, we're just starting to index this kind of information. Then the kind of intervention that is being tested in the trial. So you have, for instance, chemicals that are involved. And if you click on the chemical, then you get information about the chemical. Again, we're talking lots of identifiers. You get information about sometimes compounds that are related or recent publications about that particular chemical. And yeah, some basic statistics. So right now, Wikidata knows of roughly 900 clinical trials when many thousands have been conducted. And yeah, so that's how the information is being represented. So first you have to come up with a data model. That's the kind of things I outlined here. So like should have a title, start time, end time, and so on. And once you have that basic data model, you can try to bring that information into Wikidata. You use that data model to describe an individual clinical trial. Maybe I should actually show one at some point. So let's just have a look at this one. So this is the Scholia representation. We'll go straight to Wikidata representation of it. Again, you have information languages. Right now, this is very English-centric. Yeah, so it states on the item page that it is an instance of a clinical trial. It has a title. It has a main subject. It targets these medical conditions, has a start time. So actually started just like roughly a month ago. This number of participants. These are the drugs that are being tested. It's a phase 1/phase 2 trial. And it has this identifier in that database. And if we then go to that database, clinicaltrials.gov, we find more information that has not yet found its way, or may never, actually some of it may never find its way into Wikidata. But the point is that the information is just one click away from the Wikidata entry to that other database. So yeah, so this means we build our data model. We then
can you say something about why it's important to even have this information on Wikidata?
Sure, I can say something. I don't know how much you've told already about the kinds of things that are in Wikidata. So the Wikidata is a linked open data platform. So what it does is it links together open data, which means you can ask it questions, and it does that across databases. So you can ask it questions like, give me all clinical trials that are located in places where there's also a baseball stadium or something like this. A normal clinical trials database doesn't have no information about baseball stadiums, but if you're interested in these kind of correlations, then Wikidata is one way to bring that together. Or if you're interested in what a chemical does in a biological system, you can go to databases like PubChem that has information about the chemicals, but not necessarily about the biological effects of those chemicals. And so Wikidata has not necessarily the information about both, but has the links to the two. So you can use Wikidata to pre-sort your queries to those external databases. So for instance, you can look at certain classes of chemicals and get the information from PubChem, and you can look at certain classes of biological entities that you care about, let's say certain cell types, and you can get the information from Wikidata or from other databases, and then you can bring those things together so that you then have information about how chemicals can interact with biological systems.
So in a way, Daniel, so in a way, let's say that someone is interested to know all the clinical trials on a specific, related to a specific disease or related to a specific drug. They will get a list. How is this different than what we might find in Google Scholar when we search it?
Well, first, Google Scholar, well, I actually never used Google Scholar to search for clinical trials. I normally go directly to the clinical trials databases. But it will basically just give you text hits. And so, for instance, if a certain drug is not referred to, so for instance, most drugs have many, many different names. Let me just try this one here. I don't know this too much, but yeah, well, at least it has two alternative names, Medi 4736, and sometimes with a dash. And if you use either of those, Google might give you that for a text hit, but it might also miss some of those hits, even though they're relevant. Also, and here the ontology comes into place, Google Scholar will not necessarily know that this is a monoclonal antibody. And so you can construct your Wikidata queries such that you include or exclude monoclonal antibodies as a group, rather than just this one and using this one string. So you can actually make use of the ontology of the links between the different concepts that you've constructed. And that is much harder in classical search engines. And that's actually what Sparkle was built for, to facilitate. Was that somewhat clear? You see nobody.
Yes, it was.
Someone wrote things a while ago. Okay. Yeah, I'll occasionally, when I'm not entirely sure whether what I'm saying is relevant to you, then I'm checking back here in the Etherpad. Okay, so I'll move on and trying to, yeah, I was in the midst of explaining the workflow. So we model our data, we try to find sources where that data sits, or at least a certain subset of that data sits, and we can use it. Yeah, it's very important. Wikidata can only ingest public domain materials. So which means no restrictions on the kinds of reuse. That is a severe limitation in terms of ingesting information, but it is a real advantage in terms of reusability. Whatever is in Wikidata can be reused by anyone for any purpose. You don't have to fill in forms. You don't need a lawyer. It's really very easy to reuse. So that is emphasized on the platform. And once we have the information in, then we want to link it to other kinds of information. So one of those are the chemical compounds. Now maybe we can just go through that ontology a little bit. So a monoclonal antibody is, of course, a subclass of an antibody. Yeah, here we see many more tools. Then it is an immunologic factor. Let's just go this one. Monospecific antibody is just a subclass of an antibody, and so on. And then antibodies, again, we have lots of information about them. They're part of the immune system. They're a subclass of protein, and so on. So if you look at this on the basis of individual Wikidata items, it's very easy to get lost. And if some of you are lost right now, I apologize, but that's kind of inevitable. It is similar to just following individual pieces of straw in a haystack, and you don't even recognize that there is a haystack. But we have tools that help you abstract that information or to group it in a useful way. And some of them are already, or I've already shown. So Scholia is a tool that we have already used and I'll now reuse in a different context. So what this does is it has basically incorporated, or it converts certain questions that you might have, like what are the recently published works on the topic of Israel. It converts that into a Spark query that then goes into the database, fetches what is in the database, and presents it to you in a more or less acceptable fashion. Of course, there are many more pieces or works that have been written about Israel. So this one is focused on scholarly works, and even there the data is very incomplete because we've just started to index it in Wikidata, but at least you see the principal functionality. So here, this is the list of recent publications. You can also see the list of publications per year. Sorry, I need to oil my voice a little bit with water. Yeah. So you can get the publications per year. And also it's important that neither this list of the recent publications nor this timeline has been curated specifically. Nobody has sat down, okay, now I'm going to construct a timeline. I'm going to build those bar charts. No, this is just a representation of the data, which is linked data, which means that if you have annotated an article as to when it was published, then you can use this publication date to sort things by the date to get this recently published things list, or to plot the publications over time. Or similarly, if you've annotated a paper as to who the authors were, then the authors can be surfaced. And if you've annotated the paper also as to what the topic was, and in this case, Israel, then you can combine these two and then only surface the authors of topics that, authors of publications that have the topic Israel indicated, things like that. And so this is a very easy way to find experts who know something about Israel. Of course, you're all sitting in Israel, you know something about Israel. But the good thing about this approach is it works across topics. As long as the data is in there, it can be visualized. Here also, out of those people who have published most on the topic, according to Wikidata, so we're certainly missing many people who have published a lot about Israel, but of those that Wikidata knows, we can then build a network. And again, this graph is pre-formatted. Nobody has sat down to curate that particular graph, but you can browse it. You can click on any of those individual pieces there, and then you can continue exploring the data. We're still on the Scholia view of publications on the topic of Israel, and here, so these publications have been annotated as being about Israel, but sometimes they have also been annotated as being about other topics. So not just Israel, but for instance also Israel and immigrant, or Israel and Ethiopia, or Israel and Tel Aviv, Israel, Soviet Union, and so on. We will look at the West Nile Valley.
We see a list of what medical papers went out from Israel to the world.
That's difficult because, well, medical is hard to define. If you define it through the Wikidata ontology, then this query is just too complex and will time out. So you have to be a bit more specific, but what we can try to do is, and I haven't prepared that, so I will have to just show you, let's say, a prerogative.
Let's take diabetes and see if we can see. Can we see all the papers written by Israelis that are on the topic of diabetes?
Probably. So yeah, diabetes of course has type 1, type 2 here. And so, but here we have, let me just show you this. This is Denmark and the topic of machine learning. And so here we have papers specific for machine learning. The query is still running, where there is an author located in Denmark. And so in principle, if we know that Israel is 801, then we can do the same for Israel, and we get the papers on machine learning. And then if we know what, can you give me an identifier for diabetes? No, I'll just do it here. So let's go for type 2 diabetes. Here in Israel, and so I'll throw that in here, and then now I have no idea. Well, it gives me nothing because the data hasn't been entered. Let me try the other type 1. Maybe we're more lucky with type 1. So yeah, Scholia can only show you what is in Wikidata actually, and so oh yeah, we have one. So Eviatar Nevo, I don't know whether you know them. Is one person affiliated with some institution in, we can actually check that, in Israel, and has published at least one paper that Wikidata has indexed, and one of them has been tagged as being, he is in Haifa, okay. Yeah, so in principle, the information could be visualized this way. It's just that the data hasn't been curated usually to surface that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'll throw that link into the Etherpad as well, so that we can follow up later. So this is, I'll just throw in the link and you can add some description to it. Yeah, so we're going back to the general overview of the publications about Israel that Wikidata knows about. We're still in this co-occurring topics thing. So individual papers, like the one that we just identified, where was it? Here, let's have a brief look at that one. And we go to the Wikidata page directly. So this one has been annotated as being an instance of a scholarly article, okay. And here, the annotation type 1 diabetes mellitus. There is nothing about Israel here. Nothing on this entire page is about Israel, but this person, yeah, so the paper has been annotated as being about type 1 diabetes and being written by a number of people, one of which has been identified as an author. The others are just represented as strings, so we don't have any further information about them. But for that particular author, already it says it's an Israeli academic. And we then have additional information, links to external databases. It's an instance of a human. It's a male, country of citizenship. This is Israel. This is the point that brought it into the results of the query that we had, I guess. Or it might have been the employer, University of Haifa, also has a geolocation in Israel. Yeah, it has country Israel. I think that is the link that brought it into the query, or maybe there is some other, we could check the query. So the point is, the paper itself doesn't know that the author is, like the Wikidata item about the paper itself, does not know that this author is an Israeli or has an affiliation in Israel. But through the Sparker query, we can bring that information together so that it is being attached to the article and then surfaced in a query that looks specifically for publications from Israel. And that's the entire principle of linked open data. You just take the pieces as you need them, and as long as the relationship has been established somewhere in the graph, you can always surface it in a different context. So by annotating the paper as being about the topic, and by annotating the paper as having the author, and then annotating the author as having an affiliation, and the affiliation being linked to Israel, we can then bring all these things together. I think I have to close a few tabs again, otherwise it's getting unwieldy. I'll probably keep the West Nile virus a little bit. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, those co-occurring topics, they can also be visualized as a graph, which is yet another way of browsing the information. We don't have time to go into that. Some of those topics will actually have a geolocation, and once they have a geolocation, you can plot them on a map. That's, again, the kind of things that you don't get from the other search engines. So Google does, Google Scholar, it does Google Maps, but it doesn't bring the two together. You can't plot things on a map. And then if you're wondering what's happening here, let's say in Philippines, let's see what the link here is. Yeah, working conditions and of Filipino home care workers in Israel. So that's the link between the Philippines and Israel here. Or let's look at Nigeria. Older one, hominins. Okay, I think this is, someone has changed the geolocation of this one. And Russia. Yeah, people who emigrated from the Soviet Union. Yeah, so here, and of course, all of this is clickable, and so that provides you with another way of experiencing that information. Author score also. In other search engines, you might get some mechanism to surface people who are experts on the topic, but it's not usually as straightforward as here. So as I said before, Wikidata is incomplete in its coverage, but those people here, Aviatar Nevo, who we already had, and this Manfred Green and Itamar Grotto, these people, they are knowledgeable about the topic that we're interested in. And so if we contact them, they are very likely to know something about the topic. And the good thing is this works about more or less any topic. Also, we get, again, for free, by annotating the paper as to which journal it was published in, we also annotate, and by annotating the paper with the topics the paper is about, we're effectively annotating the journals as to what they're publishing about. Or we can reverse that. We can then find the journals that publish about a given topic, which is harder in classical databases. So yeah, Harefua, I have no idea. I guess this is an Israeli medical journal. And yeah, citations, you can get the most cited works, or the works that are most cited from works on the topic of Israel. And then, of course, the authors again. And all of that is pre-packaged. And for each of those queries, if you want to dig deeper or if you want to change it, there is the query, you can go there, you can edit it. Okay, so that was a brief tour about how we can look into a topic. You already asked for location. So let's just treat Israel as a location for the moment. Then here we see certain organizations that are in Israel. Distance here, this is a kind of artificial thing. Israel is, of course, not just a point, but yeah, in Wikidata, it has a point. So it's like the center of the country. And then from there, the distance is used to order the institutions that we find here. Already we find some gaps here, descriptions lacking for some of these. This is some of the things you could be doing. Nearby locations as topics and works is probably a query that is still running in the back. I'm not sure I have the time to actually wait for it to finish. Oh yeah, so here it actually did finish. And so you have here Ascension Island Magnetic Observatory. Yeah, so certain things that have been published that have a geolocation that is near the center of Israel, basically. Yeah, and we can also look at this as a country. So this was a location. So this location kind of visualization works also for cities and other things. Here we have a visualization based on the country. And we can use like the number of publications that Wikidata knows of to actually sort the organizations. Of course, that's not necessarily the kind of sorting you want to have for like a country, but Scholia just has this scholarly perspective. And then you can get authors affiliated with some institution in the country. So RNC Hanover, Nobel laureate, yeah, has lots of citations, probably still many more, but already they're being surfaced here. And then you have locations as topics. So here we can go in and so, yeah, so you probably can understand what this is about. I don't. And here, Qumran, okay, yeah. This one is something that I know about. Yeah, location as topics, also narrative locations of published works. So the Lemon Tree is apparently a film that plays in the West Bank. Yeah, what else? Oh yeah, here we have lots. This is maybe yeah, Samson is a film. Okay, yeah. And more interesting from the scholarly perspective, again, you can then see, okay, which collaborations does Israel have with other parts of the world? You see Africa is blank here, which is often the case in Wikidata and in such mapping exercises in general. It doesn't mean that Israel doesn't have collaborations with Africa. It just means that the data is incomplete here. And so here we see that a certain Martin Roswall from Umeå University in Sweden apparently has a paper that they co-authored with someone from Israel. And we could then dig deeper as to what that connection would be. And yeah, for all of that, we didn't need to, well, you as the users, you didn't need to write any Sparkle. You just get that for free because it's packaged here in this Scholia tool, which is open source and basically developed by the same people who work on Wikidata. And we wanted to, yeah, go a little deeper into some, let's say, medical things. So we have some visualizations that are specific to diseases. So, for instance, microcephaly. There it has. Yeah, okay. It has a genetic association with Alzheimer's disease mediated by the gene ApoE. Then you see number of publications is going up on microcephaly. We can, yeah, this is something that could be enriched actually. So there are certainly many more information that you would like to have about a certain disease, like treatments and things like that. But here we've just started to display this kind of information. You could come in with suggestions on how to improve that. So if we go, for instance, on the item about microcephaly, we see it's an instance of a disease, subclass of a cephalic disorder. Yeah, it has images, Zika virus infection is one of the causes, not the main cause, but yeah, you see it's incomplete. There is medical genetics is studying this topic. Microcephaly happens in the brain. These are the genetic associations. I actually don't understand why this one didn't show up in the other visualization. We would have to check that. There is a Twitter hashtag, yeah. And then identifies on all sorts of external databases. Now, okay, let me check for some feedback. Someone wrote in line 27, something that I can't see fully here. So let me see. I didn't hear about Wikidata. Do you think that Wikidata should be published more so everyone could search it? Is it already done? No, it's certainly not done. Yeah, the largest Wikipedia, the English one, has 5 million entries. Wikidata has 50. But nobody thinks that we're even close to being done. I think by what you've seen, well, in what I've shown you so far, you've seen there are lots of gaps because Wikidata basically zooms in at the level of detail that you want. And if you want more detail, then you can zoom in more, but you need to bring in more data. And yes, it's certainly not done. In terms of should it be published more? Well, probably yes. It's useful to let more people know about it. On the other hand, basically all the major search engines already use Wikidata. If you're using Google or any other major search engine, or even Alexa or Siri, they're all using Wikidata. Yeah, of course, they have a certain bias towards English, and I have no idea how well or less well they work with languages like Hebrew. So that is something to test, but something really to understand about Wikidata is it is much more multilingual than any other database. Also, so far, we haven't actually played with that, but I can change the language here to anything. I can go to Hangugo, and then you get the information. Once it has been translated into Korean, then you get that in Korean as well. So some things have been translated, others not. This really works, yeah, much more seamlessly than in any other database. And so that is something really worth exploring. And that could actually help to address the biases that we have in terms of English versus the rest of the world. Okay. So I have shown most of the things I wanted to show. We have not much time left, so let me just show you a few more things. The nature of, so you were asking about Israel at some point, and here, so I built a little table for which I didn't know where to put it, so I just put it in my user space, and maybe Shani can then think about where a better place would be. What this does is it basically asks Wikidata what it knows about people that have some sort of relationship with Tel Aviv University. I guess some of these are known to you. I'll a little bigger again. So at the very bottom of the list are the most famous people. At the very top of the list are the less well annotated in terms of Wikidata, which is actually to encourage people to move these items up by adding more information to them. And what this query does, it basically just looks for whether there's an affiliation or employer or educated ad relationship for any of those people.
Well, number 8 is the head of the School of Education today.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't have recognized that, but we can look at what the item says. To me, it actually doesn't say much. Yeah, so this person works at Tel Aviv University. That's that's why it shows up on the list. But you see, there's not a lot of information here. So this could be improved much further. And of course, in doing so, you could limit yourselves to people who have published on medical topics or who are actually physicians or whatever. And Wikidata can help you filter that information. Another thing I wanted to show is that, and that speaks to the granularity of the information. So here we have a wiki project that is entirely concerned with just information related to the Zika virus. Yeah, we have people collaborating on that particular topic. And we also use this topic to actually test technical workflows for article curation or curation on Wikidata more generally. Because it's linked open data, and yeah, here the linking and the open is important. It can be put to many uses that it wasn't originally intended for. And so it has also been used, for instance, to teach Sparkle. Yeah. Then clinical trials. Oh yeah, apart from Wiki Project Medicine, there are many, many more wiki projects. For instance, Wiki Project Wikidata for Research, which also has lots of subpages that brings you then to data models, for instance, for grant proposals, things like that. No, here, data models. Yeah, what a funding program, a funding call, patterns, research consortium, all these kind of things look like. And that is one of the ways in which linked data comes about. And we can do things like, yeah, women are often underrepresented in academic contexts. So we can specifically look for them and try to enrich information about them. And so here we have a list that just looks for women that are researchers or have published scholarly papers. And then it tries to pull out the occupation, field of work, awards, and yeah, also a Twitter name. So that, for instance, you could then ping them on Twitter as to whether information is correct or whether there's a better reference or these kind of things.
Daniel, can we very quickly create a similar list, but just shrink it a bit to scientists, women scientists from Israel?
Okay, sure. So how much time do we have?
We have like 10 more minutes.
Okay, so in order, yeah, okay, so item is the person that we're looking for, and we now need an additional filter, which should be something like, let's go for country of citizenship. And then this should be, was it 801, right?
Yeah.
So that is a very simple filter. Of course, I could build more sophisticated filters by taking into account like institutions. Okay, so I'll just set this up as a subpage of this one. So, woman scientist. Right. Always important to make sure that you indicate the source of your information. So I pasted in a link to that particular version of the table. Yeah, this is a long list. So this. And now I have to replace the query with the actual, oops. The actual query that I used. One more minute and I should be done. So this is the bit that actually hosts the Sparkle query. So I have to replace that with the query that I wrote here. And then, yeah, of course, some of the introductory text doesn't make sense anymore. I'll leave that to you. Okay, and now I can reload the page, and then we have the list here. So Ada Yonat, Nobel laureate, Judith Bar-Ilan. Okay, Shani Evenstein, you may have heard about her. Yeah, so that's a very quick and dirty way of creating such a list. But if you refine the query a little more, like looking for people who have an affiliation that has a link to Israel, then you can just go back to this page, re-edit the query, then rerun the bot, and it will then create a more complete list for you.
I'll just add here, אני לא יודעת, I'm going to switch to Hebrew for a second. אני לא יודעת אם שמתם לב, אבל היו ברשימה הזאת רק 7 נשים, שזה פשוט לחלוטין לא הגיוני. יש כמות מאוד יפה של חוקרות פה בקמפוס, ואף אחת מהן פשוט לא נמצאת פה כמעט. והיא לא מיוצגת לעולם כחלק מהעשייה, וגם אם נעשה את זה לא רק על נשים, אלא גם על חוקרים, דברים שנמצאים פה בקמפוס, הרבה מאוד מידע חסר. אז זאת דוגמה לפרויקט יפה שאתם יכולים לעשות, למקד אותו על מחקר שמעניין אתכם, למשל נוירולוגים או אנשים שהם חוקרים מחלות מין, או אנשים שמתעסקים בג'נדר מדיסין, כל נושא שאנשים שהם קרדיולוגים, כל נושא שמעניין אתכם, אפשר להתפקס עליו ולעשות פרויקט קטן, של להביא את האנשים האלה לתוך וויקידאטה, כדי שהם יעלו בחיפושים, וחלק מהמחקר שלהם החשוב יעלה גם, ויהיה ויזיבילי. כרגע הייצוג של ישראל מאוד מאוד ירוד. אוקיי? אוקיי. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, sorry. We're here to explain things. And if Hebrew works for that, then just do it. One last thing I prepared here is you might have a question. Okay, if I have a patient that comes in with a headache and a cough, then what are the potential symptoms? What are the medical conditions for which these two symptoms are known? And so I just wrote that query, and then the list comes out here. So all of it kind of smells like chemistry poisoning kind of things, or exposure to chemistry. And of course, this is very incomplete. There are other things you could think of that could combine headache and cough. But the point here is, once the information is in, then you can surface it this way. So for the medical conditions that you care about, you could make sure that the information is in there, and then you just write a simple query like this one, and you always have a list, your differential diagnosis, you have it at hand. And importantly, if you turn that into such a table of a kind that I've just shown, then...
Still, we can't hear you properly.
You can't hear me anymore. Okay, well, maybe my kids are playing YouTube or whatever. You can then use the multilinguality of Wikidata to actually expose the information in the language of the patient. That's also something that might be very relevant.
Let me just add one more thing here. I think that this is one of the most important things that we've seen today in terms of applied medicine, right? You can imagine an app that a doctor has in his or her office, where they click the symptoms and instantly they get a list of all the potential diseases, right? This could be used as part of your practice, and it can only exist if we have a database that connects all of these things. So the implications of having such a database is really mind-blowing when you think about it. I hope you get some kind of feeling of how powerful it could be. Daniel?
Yeah, and many of those databases actually do exist. The big problem is they're not open, and Wikidata is open and allows everybody to reuse. So I'll just paste in that query here for medical conditions with headache and what was it, cough. Yeah, so these are the kinds of things I had planned to show. I'm still around for further questions.
Yeah.
And I'm connected with Shani in case you want to follow up on any of those things.
Yeah. So can we see your face again?
Okay. Yeah, let me see. Screen share. I actually don't see where I can switch off the screen sharing. Here we go. Huh? Did I? Aha, okay. I switched off the screen sharing. Now I'm switching on my camera and you can see me again. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay. Not too many people sleeping away. Some checking their emails, their mobile phones. Okay. That's normal.
Yeah. So first, thank you so much for the showcase that you gave the students. I think they got some new impressions of what we can actually do in terms of medicine with Wikidata. And I want to open the floor for questions if you have them. Has anything that you've seen been clear? Yes. Okay. Any questions that you want to ask Daniel? It could be personal in terms of his incentive to do all of this work. As you've heard, Daniel is an actual data scientist. He is affiliated. I'm just repeating things from your introduction, Daniel. But he's affiliated with University of Virginia in the U.S. And he's working as a data scientist. But he's doing all this work as a volunteer for free. So my question to Daniel is, what is your incentive? What keeps you going, and what makes you invest all this time in, developing these queries and presentations, and even meeting us today during your Christmas holiday?
Well, it's a long thing. So one main motivation is I want to learn things. So for instance, a few years ago, I had no idea what Sparkle is, but it popped up once in a while in conversations I was involved in, both in my spare time and professionally. Second, many of the things that I'm working on, they're actually relevant for my work. So for instance, the Zika corpus came about because I was involved in the Zika response of the National Institutes of Health in the United States. And for that, I needed to go through the literature. And then I just used Wikidata to keep track of the literature on the Zika virus. And through Wikidata, I could share this curation workflow of the literature. And now other people are making use of that corpus. And so Wikidata is a really strong platform for sharing. And by other people making use of that corpus, the corpus has been enriched in ways that I wouldn't have thought about. So for instance, people have added the affiliation of people to the author items, which now allows me to ask queries like, give me the organizations with which the people are affiliated that have published most on the topic of the Zika virus, or things like that. That is mostly not my work. What I did was bring in the papers, link them to the authors, link them to the topic, and then people around that, they work on other things. They also work on like the first names. I learn things. Yeah, I learn lots of things about like the culture. The Cooccurring topics is again something that is not easy to get through classical search engines. And so in those areas that I curate, I can actually use that for my professional research now. It is becoming a resource that is relevant for my work. That was not really the reason why I started doing this, but it is now becoming useful, and that is becoming recognized. And so I'm actually working on a grant proposal that involves Wikidata, and that if that is getting funded, then it would be more of my work time as well. So there is a blend. There's benefits to just me personally as someone who wants to learn, and there's benefits to just making my professional environment better.
Awesome. And I also know you've been involved in risk management, in crisis management, disaster management. Can you tell the students a bit about this project and why you're involved in that?
Yeah, so my background is biophysics, and so this doesn't in and of itself have a strong link to humanitarian kind of activities. But by contributing to Wiki Project Medicine on Wikipedia initially, I was actually involved in, for instance, the Ebola response. It turned out that for the Ebola crisis, there were lots of resources that had very detailed information about the Ebola virus and the fever and things like that, but they were not in the languages of the people who were actually affected. And so Wikipedia was then the only source of information that actually had the languages of the people who were sick and of the people who were actually treating them in the hospitals or who had to bury them and so on. And so that was a very catalyzing, let's say, experience for me that I'm getting chills while I'm reporting this. We, as people who are distributed around the world and don't know much, and maybe have never been to this part of West Africa, we can have an impact on the lives of people there. Wikipedia was the most used resource during the Ebola crisis in the countries that were most affected. And by experiencing this, I learned about the power of, let's say, the digital response to disasters. That is something that I had kept an eye on for more than a decade actually already. But it was the Ebola crisis was a real trigger for me in terms of the wiki part of it. And since that time, I've been looking for ways in which the wiki community can help disaster response, because Wikipedia and the entire ecosystem is already covering disasters in many ways. So you can look, for instance, at the pages that are being developed right now in many languages around the tsunami that took place in Indonesia like a week ago, and things like that. And you can go back to other disasters in the past and see how detailed that kind of information is. And usually there is a time, like 1 or 2 days, when the news about the event are popping up, and then every newspaper, every TV channel has something on it, but not much detail. But after those first 2-3 days, Wikipedia becomes the main source of it, because it's longer than 3 minutes, and it actually cares about providing references to where some piece of information comes from. And then it takes a while for expert stuff to pop up, like the first papers on that tsunami. They're not going to come out until weeks or months have gone by. And so during that period between the initial news and the real expert reports, the Wikipedia page is that main resource of information that is powerful. And so if we're involved in a disaster, we probably have other things to do than editing the Wikipedia page. But the good thing is that everybody else who's not directly involved, who is not in Indonesia, they can help update that information about that particular tsunami, or about tsunamis in general, or about tsunami prevention, or about diseases associated with tsunamis or earthquakes, or as to why the earthquake warning system didn't work in this case of the volcano eruption, and things like that. And so that the next time a similar disaster happens, we're just better prepared. And that affects all of us, because we never know when the next one is going to happen, what it's going to be. And so I'm very glad that there is this community that actually tries to bring things together. And here I'm also inspired by the OpenStreetMap community, which is another virtual community that has found its way into the humanitarian workflow. So when people offer assistance to a disaster-struck region, many, like the Red Crosses and Red Crescents and so on, they fly in, and once they arrive, they often don't come with their own maps anymore. They just use OpenStreetMap, where there is a similar online community of those people who are not directly affected, but linked to some of the people on the ground, who then improve the mapping of the affected areas while the on-the-ground responders are sitting on the plane, basically. And also constantly once they are on the ground. And so that is actually a crucial element now of the humanitarian response kind of workflow. And the wiki world hasn't found its way into that particular piece, into the immediate response, but it really lays the groundwork by providing information about the locations, about the cultures, the languages, the people, about volcanoes and these kind of things, and the different kinds of eruptions or earthquakes, so that people can actually improve their background knowledge that is relevant to that particular disaster by going through the Wikimedia, let's say, platforms.
Thanks so much.
That's it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think it's really inspiring work, and we have to wrap up, but I want to ask if the students have any other questions before we do. No one. Okay. So, Daniel, thanks so much. It's been fascinating, and thank you for taking the time during your Christmas break to talk to us. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. maybe see some of you on Wiki at some point.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Cheers.